Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Newsflash Podcast, another edition. Tonight, I have a very special guest. But before I bring our guest on to the show, ladies and gentlemen, please go to the link in the description and vote for me in the Free SA Young Leaders Awards. I'm in the media category. Every vote counts. You can't vote more than once, but everybody who votes, it counts. Yeah, please go vote. The votes close on, I think, the end of May, the last day of May. So yeah, we got about 2 weeks. Hopefully we can bring the award home. Would be really cool to hang it up right here on the wall for everybody to see. And having said that, ladies and gentlemen, my guest tonight has been a guest on the show many times. It is no secret that I support what my guest is fighting for. I think it's a great idea. We've had endless discussions about why it's a good idea. So I encourage everybody to go check out those streams. And having said that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show the one, the only, the infamous Phil Craig.
Well, that's an introduction. I like the infamous. What a thing to aspire to be. Hi, Joe. Great to be back with you.
Great, man. I wanted to ask: Are you joining the show with your CIAG hat or your RP hat?
So look, I'm in Washington wearing a CIAG hat. But ultimately, okay, as you know, I mean, it's all, the name of the organisation is much more a function of what's the task you're having to undertake at that point in time. Yes. I remain the leader of the Referendum Party. I've been on social media today for the Referendum Party. But clearly in our discussions with the US, then the CIAG was the right organisation to be having those discussions on behalf of.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, please welcome Phil Craig. We're going to get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. But before I do, very important, I have to thank my viewers when they do this. Nice super chat, or Sasa chat as we call them, 140 Rand. Thank you so much, Gavin. Hope we get news from the USA. Yes, well, Phil is in Washington at the moment. Thank you. What time is it there, Phil? It must be...
It's 2:30 in the afternoon.
Okay, great. Okay, it's not too late. Sorry. All right. I was worried that you're stayed up all night just to do this interview. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, Phil right now is in Washington. Phil, just tell us why you're in Washington first. Let's start there.
Yeah, so look, so we came to Washington. I've been here for, in fact, this is my last few days. I've been here for about 5 weeks, and we came to advance the interests of Cape Independence. We understood that with the change of administration in Washington and the comments that were starting to be made about South Africa, that this offered a really unique and significant opportunity for the Cape Independence movement, and obviously there were significant costs involved, but people thankfully helped us with that, and we came out specifically to advance Cape Independence, to talk to the American administration about it, and to try and understand how they would feel about it, and to what extent they would have an appetite for supporting Cape Independence.
Fantastic. And what has been the response? You've been meeting with people in Washington, with the Trump administration. You've pissed off a lot of wokies over here back home, and let's make them cry even harder. What has transpired? What have you learned? Is the Trump administration sympathetic for the Cape Independence cause?
Yeah, so Joe, it's going to take me a few minutes to answer this question, so bear with me, and if I start to bore anybody, then you must just jump in and point out that people are snoring in the audience. Obviously, I've arrived in Washington, and I have not been on a diplomatic mission before, and we've had to find our feet. It's been very, very interesting to work our way through the various parts of government, and I think perhaps naively, when we sort of first came, you kind of think of this as if it's sort of one entity, and when you arrive here, you find it's anything but one entity. There's multiple arms of government, let's call it, and you need to engage with all of them separately. So let me maybe give a summary, and then actually what I'll do is I'll sort of delve into the sort of those individual arms and what we've been able to achieve. People must just please bear with us and understand that I can't give names. Clearly people take these meetings in confidence. We have had very frank conversations, and people have been very, very frank. But all of those doors will very quickly close if I then suddenly go on to social media and start announcing who I spoke to. But you'll get the gist of what I'm saying anyway. So the net result is, so let's start with just the overall picture. And this is my words and not the words of the administration. If the Western Cape gets to the point of Cape independence, the US, this administration, will support it. Of that I am now 100% certain, albeit that's my words, and understand it would be illegal under international law for any other country to sort of support independence ahead of time. They have to support it after the time. But this administration is extremely ideologically aligned with the things that we're trying to achieve. So that's the plus side. The other thing that we have to bear in mind is that this US administration has got a very, very specific type. It's hugely focused on what it wants to achieve in the US, and we must bear in mind that for all of its sympathies for South Africa, we take up this tiny little bit of bandwidth on their radar, and they're far bigger things in terms of the US's focus than South Africa. So that's the two extremes. We'll have to do the hard work because they don't spend their every waking day worrying about South Africa. Largely we're insignificant. But they're very aligned with what we're doing, and if we can get the job done our side, they will most definitely bring their part their side. So that sort of sets the scene for it. What I'm just going to try and do, and I just made some quick notes just so I sort of don't miss anything important. So who do we engage with? So the first thing is there's a civil service. The civil service, maybe that's the wrong name for it. That might be a British name for it, but it's professional people who are employed by the government, and they stay in their position whether the Democrats are in power or the Republicans are in power, and they're not political. Their job is to carry out a function of government on behalf of whoever happens to be in power. So that's the sort of that's the first arm of government that we engaged with. Now, most of that civil service is focused on other countries, but there are very specific parts of it whose pure job is to focus on South Africa, and we were able to engage at some length with the sections of the civil service in South Africa who are dealing with South Africa. And actually, there are some really good people there. We were able to build up some really good relationships, and they, in many ways, serve as a conduit to feed information into the American system. And one of the things that came out of there was that there was quite a lot of confusion in the US around false start, Afrikaner self-determination, Cape independence, devolution of power, federalism. And so one of the things we were able to do was then to write a white paper for them that kind of cleared all of this up and explained who was what at the zoo, what people were trying to do, what the different goals were. And that has been really, really useful. That's been very well received, and that now has been circulated, throughout the US government. We've obviously written that, and there are a number of key recommendations we made. But recognizing our own bias in it, clearly Cape independence was one of the strongest recommendations, and we strongly motivated for Cape independence. And we know that is doing the rounds in the government because people have received it that we didn't give it to, and so on. So that was if you like, the civil service. But then you've got the legislative arms of government, the Congress, as they call it, the Senate rather, and then the House of Representatives. There, I would say we probably had less success. The Senate was closed for a long time, and the focus on the legislative arm really is quite long-term, writing laws, and the people are very, very focused on their own issues. But that doesn't mean we weren't able to engage. We were able to engage with people who were had a focus on South Africa, and we had some constructive meetings, and we were able to put Cape Independence on the radar, be able to distribute. One of the things that we made before we came was a brochure that explained the benefits of Cape Independence and what the process of achieving it was, and so on. We were able to distribute that, so that now it is in the wheels of the legislative. I'm not expecting too much to come out of that. I don't think anyone's about to stand up in the Senate and say, "Hey, we should be supporting Cape Independence," but at least it's on the radar. Then one of the things that would span off from there was, obviously, I think we've all been conscious that the Cape Sea route and the Simonstown Naval Base have geopolitical significance, and I was able to meet with people who have a defence focus, and be able to confirm that the Cape Sea route and Simonstown particularly has very, very significance from a military point of view. What I've come to learn is that perhaps many of the politicians don't understand its significance, but amongst the military personnel, it's very well understood. And I was able to meet with people who are within the wheels of the Pentagon, and will and now have raised Cape Independence. So again, in that military mechanism, I don't know to what extent, but we've been able to plant the seed that hey, this is an option, and I think it was one that didn't take an awful lot of selling theoretically. And I think one person I spoke to put it, no, probably fair is, look, who knows what's about to happen in the world. There could be a conflict here, there, or another place tomorrow, and suddenly this something which at this point, perhaps from a military point of view, is something that's significant but not top of the agenda, suddenly becomes the most important thing in the world. So that was almost a sideshow, but a useful one, and one that we hadn't really anticipated until we got here. Then the US is Washington really operates around think tanks. So there's a whole load of organizations who prepare policy positions, which they then position, and particularly an awful lot of government policy then comes out of these think tanks. And depending on who's in power, different think tanks are highly influential. Well, we had quite a few meetings with different think tanks. They were almost exclusively very, very positively inclined towards Cape Independence. In some cases, outright supportive. And we developed some really, really good relationships there that will move forward. And some of those relationships are incredibly powerful relationships, and people who will, behind the scenes, actively help us advance the cause of Cape Independence. And they, having operated in the system, that's their whole purpose, have been very, very helpful in saying to us, look, these are some of the things that you now need to go away and do, because this is how that will play out in Washington. And if you want to advance your cause of Cape Independence, these things will help you get what you're looking to achieve. So that was something that was just extraordinarily good and really, really, really helpful. And then the last one, and this is a bit of an interesting one, and this was the one that got me completely off guard, is that the Trump administration is almost at war with the American government, if I can use those words, and so if we think we have this civil service, we have this group of people who are politically neutral and just doing their job, well, you can imagine in a South African context, the Trump administration doesn't really believe that many of these people are very politically neutral at all, and believes that in many ways they've overstepped their mandate and they've been too sympathetic to the left, and therefore a lot of decisions don't seem to be made in the same way in this parts of government. But actually, there's a political elite that's emerged, and what you start to realize is that the whole Trump administration is the culmination of a whole lot of work done by this quite sizable and incredibly powerful political elite. And they are the people that are filling up positions in the Trump administration. They are the people who are making the real decisions, not the civil service. And that perhaps is quite different to what's happened in the past. And we were able to get direct directly plugged into that political elite. Now, again, that political elite is hugely focused on the issues that the US wants to achieve. Cape Independence for them is largely an irrelevance. It's a side issue because they've been trying to get their man into power for I don't know how long. They've got certain issues that they desperately want to achieve. They've now got their man in power. They've got control of the two houses of Parliament. They've got 2 years before the midterms come along, and perhaps that changes. And in those 2 years, they must go absolute hell for leather to deliver on their agenda, and that's their focus. But that political elite is really, really sympathetic to the idea of Cape Independence. And once again, there are people in that elite who are willing to actively help us to the extent that they can. And that's why I can be so confident that under this administration, if we can do our part, there. There's been very, very little resistance at all to the whole notion, and quite the opposite. And that political elite, by the way, absolutely despises the ANC. There's no misunderstanding. They know exactly who the ANC are: left-wing, socialists, race baiters, good for nothing, corrupt. They think about the ANC and they don't mince their words in any way, shape, or form. They see the ANC for exactly what they are. They understand exactly what the situation is in South Africa, and that is therefore why they understand very easily why Cape Independence would be a viable solution. Coming back to our starting point, but we will have to go and do the hard work. So what have we got is we understand the temperature. We've got some really good allies behind the scenes. We understand what needs to be done, but actually we'll have to do our work too. So if I close that all up, it's been a great 5 weeks. It's absolutely been worth coming here. We've definitely moved Cape Independence forward. We've found a different. We now can be absolutely certain that at least under this administration, we would get international recognition from the US, and they'll help us where they can along the way to get to that point. But we're going to have to bring our end too.
Well, that all sounds. A lot of it's very interesting, especially that little bit of insight, behind the curtain of how the Trump administration is operating, but also very good news that should Cape Independence, the movement, do its part in South Africa. And I think we should get into that in just a moment, because what would that entail? But if it's achieved, then one big question that a lot of people were asking when you guys were running for running during the elections, and even beforehand, when people just start talking about it, people were saying no one's going to recognize the Western Cape as a country, and now it seems like that part, at least that challenge, even though dependent on a condition, is very much achievable, which is great news. Before I continue, I just want to mention to the people that are watching, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Over 300 watching, thank you guys so much. Hope you're interested. And if you've got any questions for Phil, Craig, or the Cape Independence Movement, please drop them in the live chat. I keep an eye on the live chat, and I will mark it, and there will be a Q&A session towards the end of the stream. Having said that, I'm sitting here with Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. He's also the leader of the Referendum Party. He is currently in Washington, and he just had some meetings with the Trump administration and think tanks in America talking about Cape Independence and seeing if there are any people within the administration or think tanks that are sympathizers towards Cape Independence. And the answer is yes. That's what Phil Craig has just been filling us in on. Now that the recap is done, for those of you that are watching, thank you guys so much once again. And thank you to the super chats that came in. By the way, there is one that I need to address from Matthew Dixon, saying he gave 35 Rand super chat or Sasa chat, saying we have a Mexican and a Brit discussing the pipe dream of Cape Independence yet again. Yes, that is very true. Phil, Matthew is my resident troll, so he jabs, but he jokes at the same time. Don't mind him. He's harmless. But yes, you wouldn't be wrong, and maybe we'll discuss more about that a bit later. Phil, I really want to get into, so what is the, what can you say about, okay, cool, that you, in theory, let's put it that way, have support from the American administration, in theory, but there's a condition. So the condition is you gotta come home and you've got to pull your weight, whatever that means. You gotta. Yeah, what is the condition? Can you give us a little bit more information? What needs to be done? What does the Cape Independence movement need to be done so that the U.S. can completely get behind it? What's missing?
Yeah, look. Look. The onus on the Western Cape achieving Cape independence always belonged to the Western Cape people, and effectively that's that's what we're saying here. And I suppose what we're saying is, look, there really is an opportunity here. We really can get this done, but only if we can bring our part. And now we've got to sort of, some of the things we haven't been able to achieve so far in the last few years, we need to start achieving now. There is a group, and perhaps I should have covered off. There is a sort of an influential group of people that's coalescing around some people in that elite who've got South African connections, and people within South Africa. We're starting to have discussions, around the broader picture of what can we do, and I think so. We're going to start to see some things really significant that will create a helpful environment for us, and clearly the whole refugee thing, for argument's sake, is a good example of what can happen if events that aren't directly related to Cape independence start to unfold, because they sort of create an enabling environment for us to do the stuff. But one person particularly summed it up just perfectly. They picked up the brochure that we'd written for Cape independence, they read it, they held it up and said, this, and this is a person that was very powerful, by the way, this would be really good for the US, really good for South Africa, but there's one problem. I've never heard of it, and you need to go and change that. So there you go. That you need to get there's so somebody that likes it, can see it could work, and now that person was willing to help afterwards. So that door stays open. That wasn't a put down in any way, shape, or form. It was, listen, you need to go and do some work. Now, some of that work, for example, was, look, you need to start writing op-eds and getting this into the US press, and you need to do some. So there's some practical things that we could do. But I think for years now, the Cape Independence supporters quite rightly have said, look, guys, all of these different organisations need to get their act together. You need to work together. And I think we've always said, look, what we're doing our best, and that's not always possible. Well, I think we've kind of reached the point now where we've come as far as we can come as lone rangers. We've always favoured closer working, and I think so. The first thing we're going to have to do, and certainly I intend to fully do when I come back, is sit down with those other organisations and say, guys, we're kind of reaching the point now where we're going to have to decide whether we're going to cooperate and succeed, or not cooperate and fail, because it's clear that we, at the end of the day, there's not enough of a united effort. And this is ironically exactly the same when I engaged on Cape Independence in the UK. It was much the same, which is, look, sounds great, love the idea. But when I get in a taxi in Cape Town and ask them about Cape Independence, often the people haven't really heard about it. And I think that now comes down to that. We understand the issue. It's not easy. The DA are poo-pooing it. The press, particularly the South African press, the mainstream media, doesn't want to cover it. But we simply have to find a way now of upping our game on this side, so that we can. And I think the best way for me to explain it is to say, look, we now have somebody who's willing to amplify our message onto the world stage. But actually, our message needs to be loud in the first place. Otherwise, there's nothing to amplify. So I think that's the next step for us, to sit back and to have some very, very honest conversations. So we're looking at what we've achieved an awful lot in these last few years. We've got Cape Independence very much onto the sort of political agenda, but now we need to captivate the people of the Cape, and we need to sort of put this thing onto steroids so that we can start to move forward. Because achieving it is not the problem. Yeah, technically achieving is not the problem. The problem is that if we can't motivate the people we're achieving it for to stand up and help us fight for it, then ultimately we're not going to win.
Yeah, it's listen, I've said this before on the show, and I'll say it again because I truly believe it. I think you and your team behind you, so I'm talking about Cape Independence Advocacy Group, I'm talking about Referendum Party. I'm even talking about Cape Exit, and a few others. I think, but mainly you, have been single-handedly at the forefront of Cape independence, and you are the reason why people started talking about it, in my opinion. Because yes, I'm not going to ignore Jack Miller and the things that he's done for the movement, but he had it for 7 years and people took it as a joke. You come along and now people are talking about it. The ANC was forced to address it. Media houses are talking about it. You've gone to the States and now the Trump administration knows about it. So you are doing great things for this movement. If there's anyone, and I've said this before, if there's anyone who I think can deliver on Cape independence, I think it's you. But I'm worried that this is a very, very tall mountain. You seem a little bit more optimistic about it. All the things that you just said now, that we need to mobilize people, we need to get out there, we need people talking about it. Do you guys have a strategy and plan? You don't have to share it, but I mean, is this something you're still figuring out? One person asked in the live stream, how can people help? How can people make the voice louder?
No, great, and I think so. Excuse me. So first of all, I should say that this delegation to the States was made in conjunction with Cape Exit and the Cape Independence Party. So first of all, let's be absolutely clear in the brochure. I've got one to hand here, up there, but the brochure that we've got has the logo of all three organisations on there. So we've already started down that road. I have some very, very strong ideas about what needs to be done, but I think the whole point of having a discussion with other people is that there has to be compromises, including on our side. So from my point of view, what are the things that I'm not prepared to compromise on, and what are the things that perhaps feel that we need to compromise on? Well, I think the things that I'm not prepared to compromise on are the law and the legal process, because if we don't follow the correct legal process, then we're dead in the water, and it doesn't really help. You can't really compromise and pretend that the law doesn't say what the law says, because you're going to come stuck at the end. So that's something that I'm going to absolutely dig my heels in. On the other hand, I think both Cape Independence Party and Cape Exit have had a more they've had a slightly more developed sense of what they want an independent Western Cape to look like. We've always been very, very reluctant to get into policy, and really been much more keen to leave a blank canvas. And I think I suspect that's something that we will need to compromise on, and let's see if we can't find a vision that we can all agree on. So we're going to have to sit down, and we're all going to have to be adults, and we're all going to have to say, well, look, you know what? This is bigger than any of us. It's more important than any of us. It's going to require compromise from us all. Look, I'm always hopeful. We won't have to get everybody on board. At the end of the day, we're not going to have to get unanimous consent of everybody. That's never going to happen. And it's not important, but we need to get a real core of the movement, and then we've got to move forward. What can people do to help? Great question, and at this point, just watch this space. But the biggest thing that we're missing is activists everywhere, and we're going to have a renewed push that says, look, we're probably going to need. I think we've all talked before about this 3.5% rule. And we probably need we're probably going to need 100,000 people that are really committed to Cape independence and going to do what it takes. They're going to vote for Cape independence. They're going to every day talk about Cape independence on their social media. They're going to tell their family about Cape independence. And that probably is what we need. We don't need 1 million people, but right now, how many people are living Cape independence on a daily basis? Probably 1,000. There's probably 1 million people that are sympathetic to Cape independence. We know that from polling. We know who signed up a mandate for Cape Exit. But we have to understand that sort of signing a piece of paper and then waiting 3 years, hoping that everybody else is going to do the work for you, is not going to deliver Cape independence. It's going to depend on us all standing up and doing stuff. And the call is going to come. We need to agree that plan. We need to communicate it with people. And when that call comes, then we all need to stand up. we can from our side, I'm sort of fatalistic in many ways. A lot of things in life, we can do our bit. And ultimately, it's like the referendum party. We needed people to vote for Cape Independence in 2024. They didn't. There's not much more else we could have done. We gave everybody the opportunity. It was an enormous own goal when so many Cape Independence supporters bought the DA's story and voted for the DA but ultimately. You can take a horse to water, you can't make it drink. At some point, people will have to decide, do they want Cape Independence or not? And hopefully people who perhaps were skeptical last time will start to realise, gosh, well, how's it actually worked out? Because at some point, we either need to stand up or shut up. And that moment is coming very, very soon. This is our moment. There isn't going to be a better time to deliver Cape Independence than where we are now with the ANC in complete disarray, calling white people racist the whole time. You're doing nothing for other ethnic minorities, we've got a Trump administration in the US. This is our moment. We either need to stand up or we need to go home. And I hope we're going to stand up, but ultimately that'll depend on what people are going to do, and that's going to rely all of us, not just ourselves, but getting people around us. At the end of the day, our friends, our neighbours, our colleagues.
Yeah, and I think. Unfortunately, there is a bit of I don't want to say stigma, but like you mentioned, the elections and our referendum party unfortunately didn't get the numbers that they wanted. And a lot of people are like, the election just proved that people don't want Cape Independence. And I think that's a very unfair judgment call to make, because you want to see, if you want a true test to see if people want Cape Independence in the Western Cape, hold a referendum. An election is not a referendum. A referendum doesn't decide who's going to be in power, who's going to control your municipality, who's going to control your province, or who's going to control the country. A referendum asks a very specific question, which people must then vote yes or no. And if you want a true reflection of what the Western Cape thinks, if you want a true reflection of what the Western people want for their own province, then hold the referendum. And it's always interesting to me, people bash referendum party or Cape Independence movement. It's like, oh, it's never going to happen, it's a bad idea, blah blah, what are you going to do about this, what are you going to do about that? People don't want it, people do want it. There's always these naysayers. And then when I tell them, okay, if you're so confident that people don't want it, if you're so confident that it's going to be rejected, if you're so confident that it's a bad idea, let us do the referendum. Because at the end of the day, if the referendum comes back and the Western Cape decides we don't want to exit South Africa, well, we can stop having these live streams, Phil.
But Joe, there's something. So I think that's right. But I think people also need to understand. So actually, people who mock Cape Independence don't bother me in the least. We're in a democracy. Actually, the people that really hurt me are the people who desperately want Cape Independence and who didn't vote for it, and then actually afterwards kind of think, well, we told you it was never a good idea to put out a political party, without realising that they're the people who are going to sink Cape Independence. So I agree 100%. The referendum is the means by which we determine whether people want. That was always the case. We didn't put up a referendum party thinking we were going to get a majority in favour of Cape Independence. The point is, and I think people have to grasp, the obstacle between us and Cape Independence isn't the ANC. There's no legal obstacle. I promise you, I've done even more and more work now recently. There is no legal obstacle between us and Cape Independence. The ANC are irrelevant. The DA are the people. Now and only the DA can call the referendum. The DA are the only thing standing between us and Cape Independence. They've said they're not going to support Cape Independence. They're actively blocking Cape Independence. If you go and vote for the DA because you want to have no potholes in your road, that's fine. But understand, you're sinking Cape Independence. We cannot deliver Cape Independence if you vote for the party that says under no circumstances are we going to give you Cape Independence. Because because the referendum party in the elections is about forcing the DA to call a referendum. Only they can call the referendum. We can organise a private referendum. We're trying to do that. But all that will do will give us more pressure to try and force them to call the official referendum. The bottom line is and that's the one thing that people are going to have to. That's going to be the make and break of Cape Independence. The DA deliberately set it up to say, vote for us. To keep the ANC out, and then they use that vote after the election to say, "See, nobody wants Cape Independence." That is the reality that we're all going to have to come up with. And so for me, that's the frustration. If there's anybody that makes me angry in the movement, it's the people who smugly sit on social media and say, "See, you should never have put up a political party." Actually, the answer is no, we absolutely had to put up a political party. See, you should have voted for the bloody thing. Otherwise, you're going to sink this. And if it's more important to have your pothole fixed than to have a future for your children, then you're a fool. And actually, if you're a Cape Independence supporting fool, that's even worse, because you've seen the light and then you've turned your back on it. So, I guess I'm being harsh here, but I mean, we're coming to that point in time. We've got to take some criticism on the chin. We've got to be honest with each other, and people who support this movement have got to be honest. We cannot deliver Cape Independence if actually people are going to habitually vote for the one party that's blocking us getting it.
Wow. Yeah, you're I'm seeing a very different Phil than for those viewers who didn't know, I was actually part of the Referendum party. I was running for a candidacy as well, and I helped quite a lot, or as best as I could, with the Referendum party campaign. And Phil back then was very sympathetic towards the DA, a little bit harsh, but this is probably the harshest I've ever heard you speak against the DA, and rightfully so. And I like it. I like that, because I think the one thing that is missing in the political sphere, which the left do very well, but on the center or center-right don't do very well, is have a leader that just calls it straight. And that's exactly what you did now. And that I like. No matter whose feelings get hurt, no matter, you're just unapologetic, telling facts and telling it how it is. And people get behind that. So I appreciate your honesty. I also appreciate that, the DA, I don't know, look, I don't think the DA, in my opinion, is the same DA we knew before the elections, if that makes sense. I feel like ever since they became part of the GNU, there's been a lot of changes. They've dropped the ball a few times, and a lot of people, the moment you say EWC went through NHI, Billable, a lot of people are like, yeah, but the ANC already signed that before the GNU or whatever, blah, blah. Then why did the DA run a whole campaign, Rescue South Africa? Literally, we're banking on that. They had posters that say, stop EWC, stop Billable, vote for DA. No one's been able to answer that. And I think the DA, now that they're in the GNU, are a little bit worried about losing their position. And then a lot of people always tell me, like, yeah, but they're the only ones who can rescue South Africa. Well, they're not doing a really good job at the moment. The VAT thing was the first time that they actually put their foot down. Finally, they woke up. But, okay, that's VAT. What about the other stuff? What about the other harmful policies? And I think people are starting to realize that the DA is not the savior anymore. And I think in the DA in the Western Cape is different to the DA at national level, because they're still running things well in the Western Cape. The rot is still going to come here, though. And that's what I think people don't understand. The rot is still going to come to the Western Cape, because the DA, I can't say too much, but I know through doing a bit of research, and I'm still researching, the DA hasn't, I think you've said it before, the DA has had the opportunities to put in legislation and laws and stuff like that. They're able to, in the provincial level, to protect citizens, to change things, to be able to prevent the ANC from getting its tentacles even more into the Western Cape. And the DA just doesn't do it because they don't want to have a fight, because they're too scared that the left-leaning media, News 24 and all these other horrible media outlets are going to label them as racist. And the moment that they label them as racist, all of a sudden the DA just bends to their will and bends the knee. The DA is a spineless political party. And I know that might piss off some of my viewers, but like you said, we got to be honest with each other. And I think Cape Independence right now, in the current climate of South Africa, is a solution. Maybe not the best solution, because people say don't break South Africa. That's not a solution. But at the end of the day, if you're on a sinking ship known as the Titanic, what are you going to do? Are you just going to sink with the ship, or are you going to try and get on that lifeboat? And I think you're going to try and get on that lifeboat. And the lifeboat that we're talking about right now is Cape Independence, because Cape Independence has the potential to be one hell of an awesome, or the Cape Republic has the potential to be one hell of an awesome country. And you can either be part of that, or you cannot be part of it. Cool. My rant is over.
That's right. No, look, and I think the complicated thing is that often people, we tend to see things in binary where often multiple things can be true at once. Do you know what I mean? Just because one, yeah, and that's the challenge. So we all understand that in a two-horse race between the DA and the ANC, any sane person votes for the DA, and we all understand that the Western Cape is fundamentally better run by the DA than by the ANC. So I get all of that. So that's not so. So I think, and I understand that there'll be an awful lot of people who are very grateful for the DA, and I'm one of them. I'm grateful for the DA. That was the whole point with the referendum party, was to remove the DA from power. The point, in the day that there was never going to be any other government. The DA used this sort of the Swart Gevaar tactic to say, listen, vote for us, otherwise the ANC were going to come back. They were never going to come back. The point is not to remove the DA from power, whether you want them or not, they're going to be there. The point is that we have to force them to do the one thing that we want them to do that they don't want to do. So it's about being astute and tactically voting. The ANC, the DA are absolute liars when it comes to election time. There's no other nice way to say it. At the end of the day, they sat here saying, vote for us or the ANC is going to come back. They have polling. They have far better polling data than anybody in the country. They knew fine well that the ANC was going to get about 20% of the vote. They knew fine well that there wasn't even the remotest possibility, none whatsoever, that the ANC was going to come back. When they're saying vote for us or the ANC is coming back, they're not saying that because they believe it. They're saying that to try and scare people into voting for them, because what they really wanted to do was to not fall under 50%, so that they wouldn't have to call a referendum on Cape Independence. And unfortunately, Cape Independence supporters who voted for the DA, that's what they delivered. They delivered a DA who didn't have to call a referendum on Cape Independence. And here we are now. It's fine. That's done. It's water under the bridge. But now we're saying, okay, what's the next tactic? How are we going to do this? Because I said about the legal process, Section 1272F, the only person who's empowered to call an official referendum on Cape Independence is the Western Cape Premier. And so therefore, that's the person that you have to get all your political pressure on to force that referendum to be called, because if you don't have any pressure on them, that's why Cape Exit's 840,000 mandates have no value when it comes to getting a referendum called. Why? Because it doesn't affect Alan Windey in one little bit. Well, it's fantastic you've got 840,000 things, but actually, you know what? I just got myself elected. So good bully for you. What are you going to do with them? And that's the difference when it came to voting, because actually it's the one thing is, well, hang on a second, you won't be the premier unless you go. And that's the difference. And unfortunately, that's one of the realities that we've got to get to, is that whether we like it or not, Cape Independence is a political process. And the only thing that political parties fear is losing votes. Yeah. So, and I don't say the Referendum Party, it doesn't matter to me with the Referendum Party, Cape Independence Party, Freedom Front Plus, of course, I prefer it, Referendum Party, but we'll have to sort that out amongst ourselves again. We can't split our own vote. But actually, so that's something we'll have to sit down and talk about again before we next go to the ballot. But we have to get pressure on the Western Cape Premier. And obviously part of the thing that we can do, some of that can come from the US, and there are some things behind the scenes that have come out of this US trip that aren't directly Cape Independence, but are going to be very, very powerful in putting pressure on. And you've seen some of those without giving much away in that video that Rob Hersoff came out and talked about. Let's move the embassy to the Western Cape. Let's have the US government start reaching a trade agreement with the Western Cape as opposed to South Africa. So they're the sort of thing you can imagine. They're the sort of things that that I think we can advance quite significantly as a result of our time in the US and some of the contacts that we've made here. and which will advance Cape Independence significantly and start to create a different sort of pressure on the Western Cape Premier. So we're not saying it's just voting. I guess what we're saying is we'll do our bit, but when it comes to followers doing their bit, they have to do it too. They can't leave it for us.
100%. And I think, look, I think despite the recent polling numbers, which maybe we should discuss very briefly, it still showed a promising amount of people still support or want a Cape referendum. But maybe you can give us maybe you should first tell us the recent polling in brief. What was the most important takeaways? Maybe 3, and then we can discuss it further.
Well, I'm going to give you 2. So what did the polling confirm? It confirmed, first of all, that the majority of people in the Western Cape theoretically are in favour of a referendum on Cape independence, and that's now an ever-present through I think the first poll in 2020 was at 47%. Everything else has been over 50%. It's absolutely clear that the Western Cape people favour a referendum being held on Cape independence, and their premier is refusing to give them one. So that's the first thing. The second thing for me, and the one big takeaway here, is support for Cape independence fell from last time. It's still decent at 43%. We were within striking distance of 50 with a good campaign, and there's a margin for error in this poll of 3 or 4%. So people shouldn't get too upset about that. I'm confident that if we can get a referendum and we can hold a good referendum campaign, we'll sway the vote. The danger, ironically, is where did that support go? And that comes back again. And why the DA is so important is that DA factor. Broadly speaking, the coloured support remained the same. Broadly speaking, Afrikaner support remained the same. Black support was down slightly, but I think probably in the previous poll it was probably very high for its margin for error. So I think it's probably more realistic. But there's still a hardcore a hardcore minority of black voters who can see that Cape independence. It's funny, you don't see them on social media particularly, but they're there. They're there every time in polling, which is great. What the big hole in this is white, English-speaking DA voters. That's the big hole that have bought into this DA story of listen, Cape independence isn't possible. It isn't a good idea. We can save all of South Africa. That's the section that's missing. And that's the section that we'll have to win back. But the good news is, what have those people bought into? The GNU. The GNU is just a dead man walking, as I think we've all seen. So I hope that a large number of those will come back. But of course, the DA are already doing what they do, which is just moving on to the next story that they're going to sell. So they sold MPC, it didn't work. Don't worry, they moved on and they sold GNU. That's not going to work. Don't worry, they're now moving on to this story of somehow we're the biggest party. And I think one of and all of this is just inherently dishonest. And there's a tweet, and maybe we can share it afterwards, but I put it out about a week or so ago, which showed the combined vote of the African nationalists, ANC, MK, EFF. Bearing in mind that we started off with just the ANC, then we got the ANC and the EFF, then we got the ANC, EFF, and MK, but they're just breakaway parties of the ANC. And for 30 years, their share of the vote has had a high of 69%. It started at 66. It went up to a high of 69. It's now at 64. And for 30 years, it stayed within a band of 5%. It isn't changing. It isn't ever changing. That is the fundamental divide in South African politics. You can tell whatever story you like. 2/3 of voters in South Africa are African nationalists, and they are not going to change. We're the other third. And we've got to, and so we have got to stand up for ourselves and claim our heritage for ourselves, which is obviously what Cape independence and other forms of self-determination are, because the majority is never going to change. It hasn't changed in 30 years. To think that suddenly it's going to change every 5 years, and every time it doesn't change, to have some other reason of why it's going to change the next time, is just nonsensical. We have to, and I guess I'm talking to singing to the choir, as they say, because I'm sure most supporters are already believing in Cape independence, but that's the reality. It's our only option.
Well, actually, there's quite a few people in the live chat that are not too happy about our discussion, but but that's fine. I welcome different opinions and stuff like that. I don't mind. There are always going to be the naysayers. There are always going to be the haters, and there's always going to be the skeptical people. I like the skeptical people, and that's absolutely fine. I think. Speaking about the numbers, speaking about the recent poll, again, like you said, nothing to be discouraged about. There's a lot of reasons as to why it could have dipped, and also it's a snapshot in a specific time, right? Who knows if you were to do this polling again next year, what the numbers would say. Hopefully they'll rise. And who knows?
Strong numbers, Joe. Sorry, we must bear in mind the one thing. Just because we had incredibly strong numbers last time, these are strong numbers. Many an independence movement would give their left testicle to have these to have these polling numbers. These are strong polling numbers.
Yes. Yeah. No. Sorry. Yeah. I didn't mean to say that they're weak polling numbers. I'm just saying that there's a bit of a dip, but it can change next year. So, having said that, let's get to some of the questions before we end the conversation. There's a few questions I've been keeping an eye. Let me start with the super chats, because there's been another super chat here from Andre, who says, well, first of all, thank you so much for the super chat, or Sasa chat. He's given a 35 rands super chat, and he's asking if 3 official polls all show a majority wants a referendum. Can Windy not be taken to court to force a referendum due to the will of the Western Cape people? It's a good question.
Sadly, not. If only. I would love nothing better. The trouble is, there's no law that says the Premier must do the will of the majority. They probably had 3 referendums on the death penalty. You'd find a majority in support. So unfortunately, the answer in a democracy is to vote the person out if you don't agree with them. But you've got no legal means to force them to do something that you want them to do. So we can only bring about political pressure, but there's no legal basis of that case. Unfortunately, I wish there was. Otherwise, I'd be fundraising for it very quickly.
So Rob's Gone Sailing says, I met Tucker Carlson in Miami and told him about you specifically, Phil. Your team should reach out to Tucker Carlson for the next level. It's more of a comment.
Well, okay, but I can respond to that. So first of all, thank you, Rob. I really appreciate it, and that's super important. We collectively we have a far bigger network than any of us individually. I don't have contact with Tucker Carlson, and actually the fact that you've gone and introduced me to him and Alma is absolutely fantastic. Now, ironically, in one of the meetings I had, the other person literally called Tucker Carlson while I was there and asked him, "Would he have this on the show?" And under other circumstances, he would have done. But unfortunately, they'd just done the show with Ernst Roots on South Africa, and he said, "Look, he wasn't able to at this point in time do another show on South Africa." But yes, so you're the first person, Rob. There's a second person now, and ironically, just before he left, where was he before? Fox. And where was it that he was before that he left? Because he was going to come. He did reach out actually about a year and a half ago. They're going to come to Cape Independence and do a program from the Cape on Cape Independence. But actually, then he left. That company was out. So we've had lots of near misses with Tucker, but eventually we'll get there, I'm sure. But thank you, Rob. And if anybody else has got contacts, please do, because actually, it's very useful you say that. One of the bits of advice I got I've made some really good contacts, and people have given lots of advice, including from within the system, off the record. And one of the off the record pieces of advice I got from within the system, within the civil servants, was, look, this administration is not working the way it's supposed to work. Donald Trump is surrounded by South Africans. If you want Cape independence, get to those South Africans. So if anybody's listening, has contact with those South Africans, we're getting closer and closer and closer. But actually, that was the advice from the US government, because they said, look, normally you'd have all these policy papers and stuff, and you'd walk up the system. We can do all of that, but that's not how it's going to work. Donald Trump's going to tell me 3 things about Cape independence, and it's going, and he's going to talk to his South African friends, and the decision's going to get made. if anybody has contact with that clique around Donald Trump, that then please let us know. And we're talking about Gary Prayer, Rian Bernard, obviously Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, and so on. That group of South Africans are very, very influential. And if anybody has contact with them, we're trying to get to them.
Why not ask Ernst Ritz?
Look, I don't want to sort of pull names of the ones that, but trust me, we've pulled on every string we can pull on, and Ernst has been very helpful to Cape Independence, I have to say, without giving away too much. So,
okay.
But I mean, not everybody's connected to everybody, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Fair enough. Then there was a very pressing question from Grasshopper, who wants to know, what exactly did you say to Fox News?
So what did I say to Fox News? Well, obviously the context there was about the Afrikaners that were arriving, and I effectively said that the South African government is trying to make out that there are no issues in South Africa. That that actually there's no racial discrimination, there's no issues, and I said, look, whilst I can't speak to the specific details of the families who've come, what I can tell you is there is widespread racial discrimination against ethnic minorities. There's a serious crime issue, and that the commandos and the security apparatus around farms has been dismantled. It was supposed to be replaced and never was, and that there are some very, very significant issues in South Africa. And whilst Ramaphosa and his regime might be trying to somehow suggest there's nothing to see here and then let's move along, that's absolutely not the reality, and that ethnic minorities are leaving South Africa and have been for some time in droves. And I said this might be 49, but there's about 1 million people have left the country. This just happened to be 49 on this flight. So I'm very much trying to say there is a problem here, and don't if the South African government tries to suggest there isn't, don't believe them. But actually, I'm preaching to the converted, because I promise you that the US administration know exactly who the ANC and what they stand for, and they're not buying any of their nonsense. They're nothing, not one bit at all. One thing I'm happy at Donald Ramaphosa can be as smarmy and as he normally is, and do his best to schmooze the US. It isn't going to work. In fact, all we're hoping for is a Zelensky type. I'd love to have it televised in 2 chairs and watch Ramaphosa be confronted with what the US really think of him and his regime, because they ain't buying any of his bullshit.
Good. Excellent. And yeah, I think Cyril's going to go visit Trump soon. So yeah, I hope that is televised and we have another situation like that. Jeff Menezes wants to know what's inside that jar.
A grapefruit juice. Sorry, so we were laughing, Joe. One of the things that obviously Washington's an expensive city, and we're a not-for-profit spending donors' money. So you can see I'm drinking out of an old jar of jalapenos to try and spare on costs. So I've lived frugally, and that's allowed us to stay longer. And the longer you stay, the more you achieve.
You should have just said that you're drinking jalapeno juice, and to keep the hair on your chest.
I ate the jalapenos first, so.
All right, so let's see what other questions we have coming in here very quickly. I'm just going to take 1 or 2 more. I think this one might be. Well, I don't know how. Let me just ask it. Venom was asking, will the new Cape Colony have place for refugees from the north?
Look, I absolutely think so. obviously people always have to be conscious that when that I can't speak for a country. It has to be negotiated. But one of my personal proposals, and I believe strongly for, is that we should offer. Exactly ironically as the US is now doing. For years I've been saying, I may have said it on your show before, that I believe that the Western Cape should offer refugee status to anybody who is a victim of racial discrimination in the rest of South Africa. And that's a win-win, that if South Africa doesn't like it, then they must do away with race-based policy. So I've always said that. So it's somewhat ironic now that that's exactly what the US are doing. And obviously, when I talk about race-based policy, I mean, it's not just white South Africans or Afrikaners that are victims of race-based discrimination in South Africa.
Cool. There's nothing. I mean, like, there are some other questions, but I feel like I can answer them later. It's not related to necessarily what you are doing in Washington. So I'm going to give it maybe a minute or two just to see if anybody wants to know anything that you spoke about with Trump, or, well, you didn't speak to Trump, but I mean, like, with the Trump administration or whatever, anything to do with the conversation. But I want to say thanks again, Phil, for joining me on the show and giving me, I could be wrong, as far as I know, you haven't been interviewed by anyone else thus far. Yeah, so thank you for giving me the scoop, the exclusive scoop. So everything you guys are hearing right now is a first, and you heard it here on the Newsflash podcast. I will say this, that there's been, or I'm just informing you rather, Phil, that when I talk about Cape Independence, at least on this channel, it does feel like a lot more people, at least in the comment section of a video, there's more. It feels like there's more support than ever before. The comments are usually positive. There's the one or two that are like, "Oh, it'll never work" or whatever. But for the most part, it's positive. So keep doing what you're doing, please. Don't stop. And I know you're a man of. You're a bulldog, man. You're a bulldog. You even when you have the bone, you want more bones. So so just keep working hard and doing what you're doing.
We will do. Thank you, Joe, and I appreciate it. It's been good to, obviously it's been, we sort of kept a quiet profile whilst I've been over here, but I'm coming back to, well, actually I've got to head to the UK briefly, but anyway, I'm leaving Washington later this week, and so now we can sort of be able to sort of talk about what's happened a bit more freely. So it's great to be able to start that process with you.
Fantastic.
And if I can have one sort of thing just to say, look, I'm sort of conscious that that I'm really grateful for I mentioned that the Cape Exit and the Cape Independence Party joined, and I'm really grateful for that. At the end of the day, I've sort of been, I think, fairly blunt about what we need to do individually, and but I want to emphasise that those two organisations have been we're very, very supportive of this, and you really at sacrifice to themselves, and I would really especially like to thank them for that.
Fantastic. One more question actually here. Has something like this happened in other countries, and if so, what was the result of it? Cape Town being at a very tip of South Africa would then, I don't know. I think the characters ran out. There's been a few cases, right? Like of independence.
Yeah, look, far more than people ever realise. So I mean, people kind of almost think of secession as something that's quite extraordinary, but the reality is it's just the nature. If you look at a map of the world 100 years ago, you wouldn't recognise it. Probably half the countries in the and even if we start thinking, the US is an example of a country that's seceded. Half of Europe is seceded. Loads of African countries. The most recent one, with obviously South Sudan. There's another part of Sudan that's looking to break away. Eritrea and Ethiopia split up. Somaliland. You could just go on. Canada at the moment is looking like it might be even breaking up. The Soviet Union broke up. Yugoslavia broke up. It's just Czechoslovakia broke up. Holland and Belgium were originally the same country. You could just go on and on and on. It's just so normal that people almost don't realise that it's happening all the time until it's happening in your country. There's nothing extraordinary about what's going to happen. And bear in mind that South Africa is a very, very new country, which has never really worked. It's a prime candidate for secession.
Yeah. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call it here. Phil, once again, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Thank you so much for giving all this information. I'm cautiously optimistic, but optimistic as always. Still, it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done for Cape Independence, but it is achievable. So I cannot wait to see what Cape Independence Advocacy Group and Referendum Party and all the others, Cape Exit, Cape Independence Party, and all the rest of them do moving forward. So yeah, thanks again, Phil.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joe.
All right, cheers. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Phil Craig from Cape Independence Advocacy Group and leader of the Referendum Party. Now, there were some questions that you guys had that I felt that I could answer them on my own. I don't know if these individuals are still here, but one question, who exactly would be citizens of this Cape Independence? Anyone. Anybody that is living within the Western Cape will get the option to choose. Not clear yet if you're going to be able to have dual citizenship. That might be a possibility, so you can be South African and Cape Republic citizen, or you'll have to choose. But it's anybody who resides in it. That's just how it works. Matthew Dixon, I identify as the president of the Independent Cape. Okay, we have to vote for you first, Matthew. Matthew also giving another 14 Rand super chat. Thank you so much, Matthew, for doing that. And he says, thanks, Jose, and weird British guy. Gracias. What else? Some other questions that came in are Bernard saying, can we just get to the point? DA screwed you. Social media. Cape Town is strategic. Yes. Can you fight national? No. Do Cape want it? Yes. Stop talking political. Well, I think this was an earlier comment. I think later on when Phil was very straightforward, I think we're seeing a different kind of Phil Craig, which is great to see. And hopefully, this time around, I think he's really holding the bull by the horns. At least that's the impression I'm getting. Chris LaRue saying, how is the visa or passport for our family going to work? If they are from the Free State, for instance. Well, your family, as far as I know, like I know that you can get your citizenship from and a lot of countries work this way, through descent. So that usually means like if your mom or your dad is whatever nationality, you can apply to maybe get the same nationality. In terms of brother or sister or aunt or uncle, I'm not sure how that's going to work, but that's all going to be hashed out in the negotiations and as things get moving towards a Cape independence. But it will run like any other country. So if you want to be a citizen of the Western Cape, just like any other country, you'll have to apply to be a citizen and have to go through the legal process of doing so. It's really not that difficult to grasp. So for example, if you want to be a citizen of America, you can. You just have to go through that process. And then, but there might be some exceptions. Like for example, with England, I know they make some exceptions when you want your UK passport, if you got UK family or whatever. So those types of nitty-gritties, details have not been ironed out just yet, but there are people like Cape Exit who are busy ironing those details out. And what else? What other questions? Kurt's asking, what will you do about the ports, railways, networks as they all are effed up? Fix them. That's what's going to happen. And Edward Abrams, is your visit to the US bearing fruit? That is speeding things up for Cape Independence. Are the Americans showing interest in it and willing to help fast track? Well, if you rewind to the beginning of the stream, you'll see exactly what Phil Craig said about that. But basically, to answer your question, speeding up things, not so much. But there is an interest, and the Americans are sympathetic. And Phil, in his words, says that the Americans would recognize the Western Cape as its own independent country, which is a huge thing, by the way. That is something that's very huge, and it just means that Phil Craig and the rest of the Cape Independence movement need to pull their weight a bit, need to work a little bit harder to get the pressure going on the ANC, at least. So that's all coming. Let me just see if there were any other questions. Keanu, nice to see you here, man. Thanks for the awesome podcast. You're welcome. Okay, it's bedtime. Go brush your teeth. Why are you talking to me like my mother, man? Mario saying, thanks, Phil. Enjoy. You're welcome. Cape Independence is one option and a good one. Yes, it is. Matthew Dixon is a cool guy. Don't worry. He's my resident a-hole troll. Okay, and there's a love-hate relationship between us. But he just mustn't overstep the line. There is a line. He hasn't overstepped it yet, and now he's probably going to try to, as a joke. So yeah. So actually, family that come and visit us, do they need a passport? Yes. But people get so hung up about the passport issue. Okay, it's not really an issue, guys. It's gonna work. Has anybody traveled to Namibia? Has anybody tried to travel to Namibia? It is so easy. You have a South African passport. You just show it at the border when you get off the plane or whatever, and then you're in the country. Like, you guys act like you haven't traveled outside of South Africa. It's really not that difficult. Having a passport is not a bad thing. Having a passport is a part of life. If you want to travel across the world, you need a passport. If you go to America, you need a passport. You don't mind showing your passport when you go to the States. But no, I think it's because people are so used to the Western Cape being a province and traveling freely from the Western Cape to other parts of South Africa. But yeah, if Western Cape becomes its own country, then yes, you're going to need a passport to get into it. And your family or whoever else that isn't in the Western Cape can show their South African passport and they can get into the Western Cape. It's not an issue. It's not a problem. It's not going to be difficult. It's not going to be whatever. Like, it's going to work like Namibia, like any other country. It's really that easy. It's not. People get so hung up on this passport thing, and some people calling it a dumb pass. It's like, guys, that is a completely different thing. If the Western Cape becomes its own country, it means it becomes its own country. It's going to have its own borders, its own like, not culture. I think the culture is going to stay the same. I actually think that the Western Cape is going to be that rainbow nation that was once promised to us. That's what I honestly think. And I think that the Western Cape is going to thrive. I really do. And yeah, so it's not that big of a deal, guys. Once you have your passport, you just show it to the kind person at the terminal and they'll let you in. I don't understand. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to take a few more questions and then I've got to go. When you come back from US, what are the next steps? When you come back from... I live in South Africa. So, not sure. Maybe give me a little bit more context on what you mean by that. So... yeah, it's going to work like Palace Rhine. No, not at all the same, but okay. I like how people try and like put a negative spin on this, but all of you naysayers, the moment Cape Independence happens, are gonna be very excited. If you stay in the Western Cape, you're gonna be so excited about it. You might cry a little bit at the beginning, but then you'll accept it and you'll be happy. And those of you that aren't in the Western Cape when it happens are going to flee here in like 6 months' time. All of you are going to flee here. As a matter of fact, some of you already are fleeing here. So, yeah. Anyway, I can go into a lot more detail. But yeah, I don't have the time. Anyway. Anyway, if nobody else has a question, I'm going to end the stream, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and hanging out with me and stuff like that. Thank you all for the super thanks and the Sasa thanks and the super chats and the Sasa chats and all that stuff. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching and being a part of this. Exactly. So, there is one. The reason why I asked if Phil Craig has dual citizenship, if things don't work out, he can just hop onto a plane and go back to his other country. What would become of Cape Town and its people? Well, okay. There is a legal process, which Phil Craig did allude to when he said he wants to do everything the legal way. There's a legal process that goes down when you want when you want secession. This applies to any province, by the way, that wants secession, or any group that wants secession. There's a legal way of doing it, okay? And Phil Craig is following that legal process. That's number one. Number two, there has to be a referendum. In other words, the Western Cape needs to hold a referendum before anything can happen, before all your worries, okay? Like, that's the first step. Nothing is going to happen before that referendum. So all the worries that you have are mute, because without a referendum, without doing a referendum, there's no point in having these discussions, because a referendum will determine whether or not the Western Cape people want to secede or not. And if they want to secede, there's a legal process after that follows, where all the questions that you guys have will be answered. And maybe I'll go into it another time on a separate stream. But if the referendum comes out and people vote no, then nothing happens. Nothing bad happens. Western Cape remains part of South Africa. Nothing changes. Nothing goes to shit. Well, I mean, if the ANC is still in power, things will probably still go to shit. But what I mean is, we're still on that train wreck, and nothing changes. Okay, nothing's gonna happen to the Western Cape people. Not at all. All right. They've decided we don't want to secede. Fine. Done. Finished. End of story. No more Cape independence. You guys made your decision. That's a democracy. That's how it works. Simple. So hopefully we can convince people that Cape independence is a good idea. And I'll be keeping you guys updated along the way. Anyway, with having said that, thank you guys once again for watching, and thank you, Kiana, for gifting 5 Newsflash memberships. It's very nice of you, very sweet of you. Thank you so much. Okay, cool, guys. I'll hopefully be back next week with another stream. I'm still looking for a guest. If not, I will see you again soon. There is a very interesting Newsflash episode coming out tomorrow morning. Look out for that. It's about the reaction of how the ANC, the woke left, have reacted to those Afrikaners that have landed in the US. Very embarrassing to see. Not the Afrikaners being in the US, I'm saying it's embarrassing the way the government and certain woke individuals have reacted to this news. But yeah, more details tomorrow morning. Check out that video. With all that being said, thank you guys once again for watching, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.